My son put me up for laughs at his gala. $1 for my ordinary mom. Then a man bid $1 million. Margaret had learned to read the mail without hope. Bills had a certain weight in the hand. Flyers felt thin and noisy. Letters from old friends were rare and usually brought news that made her feel older than she already felt. So when the thick cream envelope arrived, she noticed it at once. It sat on top of the rest of the mail like it knew it did not belong with the others. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. She turned it over before opening it. Her name was written in clean, dark ink, careful and neat. No return address, just a small gold mark pressed into the corner. She stood in her kitchen, the late afternoon light slanting across the counter, and for a moment she simply breathed. It had been a long day. She had cleaned offices downtown since early morning, her feet still aching inside worn shoes. The kettle on the stove had gone cold without her noticing. When she opened the envelope, a card slid out, thick and smooth, with raised letters that caught the light. It invited her to a charity gala in the city, black tie, formal evening. The name of the foundation was printed in bold letters, followed by the line that made her heart pause. Hosted by Ethan, her son. Margaret sat down at the small table by the window. She read the card again, slower this time, as if the words might change if she gave them enough care. It was named a grand hotel she had only seen from the outside, its windows glowing like something from a storybook when she rode the bus past it at night. The date was 2 weeks away. The time was written in precise detail. Dinner. Speeches. Auction. She pressed the card flat on the table with her palm. Ethan was inviting her. That was what the card said. The feeling that rose in her chest was a mix of warmth and worry, pride and a small quiet fear she had learned not to name. She had raised Ethan alone. His father had left when Ethan was still small, and Margaret had never spoken badly of him, even when money was tight and nights were long. She worked 2 jobs when she had to. She learned how to stretch meals and how to smile when she felt like crying. She had taught Ethan to say thank you, to look people in the eye, to aim high but stay kind. Or at least she thought she had. Ethan had grown fast, taller than her by the time he was 13, already talking about big plans and bigger dreams. He had left for college in the city and never really came back. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became rare. When he spoke of success, of meetings and deals, of people whose names Margaret could not remember and places she would never see. Still, she loved him. That love had not changed. It never would. She picked up her phone and checked for messages. There was one from Ethan, sent earlier that morning. She had missed it during work. Mom, you should have an invite today. Big event. Hope you can make it. No heart. No extra words. Just that. Margaret smiled anyway. That evening, she stood in front of her closet and opened the doors wide. The smell of old fabric and clean soap filled the air. She pushed hangers aside, her fingers moving over clothes chosen for comfort, not show. Most were plain. Some were faded. There was one dress at the back she had worn to church on special days. It was dark blue, simple, and a little too long now. She held it up and looked at herself in the mirror. Would this be enough? She thought of Ethan, of the way he dressed in the photos he sometimes posted online. Sharp suits. Bright smiles. Rooms filled with people who looked like they belonged. She did not look like them. She never had. The thought made her chest tighten, but she pushed it aside. This was her son. This was his life. If he wanted her there, she would go. Over the next few days, the invitation stayed on the table where she could see it. She made tea and glanced at it. She ate dinner alone and glanced at it. Each time, it reminded her of how far Ethan had gone, and how far she felt from him now. At work, her co-workers asked why she seemed distracted. She told one of them about the gala. The woman laughed softly and said how proud she must be. Margaret nodded, even though pride was only part of the truth. The rest was harder to explain. She tried to picture the night. The lights. The music. Ethan stood tall, speaking with ease. She imagined clapping for him from her seat, her hands aching but her heart full. In her mind, he looked over and smiled at her, the way he used to when he was young and needed reassurance. But there was another image that came uninvited. Ethan turned away. Ethan pretends not to see her. Ethan wished she were someone else. Margaret had learned to live with small hurts. This one was not new. It had grown slowly over years of careful distance and polite words. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself Ethan was busy. She told herself success changed people, but not their hearts. On the day she went to buy shoes, she took the bus into town and walked into a store she usually avoided. The prices made her nervous, but she found a pair that fit and were plain enough not to draw attention. She paid and held the box carefully, as if it might break. She also bought a small purse, nothing fancy, just enough to carry her phone and a few personal things. When she got home, she laid everything out on the bed and sat beside it, tired but determined. The night before the gala, she barely slept. She lay awake listening to the sounds of the building, footsteps above her, a siren in the distance. Her mind went over the same thoughts again and again. What if she said the wrong thing? What if she spilled something? What if she embarrassed him? She reminded herself that she was his mother. That should be enough. The next evening, she dressed slowly, carefully. She brushed her hair and pinned it back the way she always did for special days. She put on the blue dress and smoothed it down. It still fit. She stood in front of the mirror and studied her face, the fine lines around her eyes, the quiet strength she had earned over years of work and worry. "You can do this," she said softly to her reflection. The bus ride into the city felt longer than usual. Buildings rose higher, lights brighter. People boarded dressed in suits and evening wear, talking loudly, laughing. Margaret sat near the window, her hands folded in her lap, watching the streets change. When she stepped off near the hotel, she had to stop for a moment. The building was even grander up close. Tall doors. Warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Cars lined up, letting out guests dressed in fine clothes. The air buzzed with excitement. Margaret took a breath and walked forward. Inside, the space opened wide, filled with sound and movement. Music played softly, glasses clinked, voices rose and fell. She felt small, like a quiet note in a loud song. She scanned the room, looking for a familiar face. She saw Ethan near the center, surrounded by people. He wore a dark suit that fit him perfectly. He laughed easily, shaking hands, leaning in to listen. He looked confident. He looked like he belonged. Margaret felt a swell of pride that pushed aside everything else, if only for a moment. She waited at the edge of the room, unsure of where to go. People passed her without noticing. A server offered her a drink, and she shook her head politely. She did not want her hands to shake. Ethan finally looked her way. His smile faltered for just a second before returning, bright and practiced. He excused himself from the group and walked toward her. "Mom," he said, his voice warm but tight. He gave her a quick hug, light and careful. "You made it." "Of course," Margaret said. "I wouldn't miss it." He nodded, glancing around as if checking who might be watching. "It's a big night," he said. "Lots of important people." "I can see," she replied, looking around with quiet wonder. "I'll try to come by later," Ethan said quickly. "Things are pretty busy right now." "Take your time," she said. "I'm just happy to be here." He smiled again, then turned back toward the crowd. Margaret stayed where she was, watching him go. The pride was still there, but it was joined by something heavier. She felt like a guest in her son's life, invited but not fully welcome. She moved to a small table near the wall and sat down. From there, she could see most of the room. She watched people bid on items during the auction, raising paddles, laughing, calling out numbers that sounded unreal to her. She clapped when others clapped. She smiled when it seemed right. As the night went on, she noticed the way Ethan moved through the room, always smooth, always in control. She noticed how he kept his distance from her, how their eyes met only once more, briefly, before sliding away. Margaret did not complain. She did not make a scene. She sat quietly and waited, the way she always had. Still, a small ache settled deep in her chest. She wondered when loving someone had started to feel like standing on the outside of a glass wall, able to see but not touch. When the auction ended and the applause faded, she stood, smoothing her dress. She told herself this was just one night. Those things would be better later. That Ethan loved her, even if he did not know how to show it anymore. She took one last look around the room, at the lights and the people and her son at the center of it all. Then she waited, patient and quiet, unaware that this night was only the beginning of something far larger than she could imagine. The room was warm with noise and light. Music floated softly above the sound of voices, glasses touching, chairs shifting. Margaret sat where she had been for most of the evening, near the edge of the room, trying to make herself small without seeming rude. She watched people more than she watched the stage. She had always been good at that. Ethan moved through the crowd like he owned the air around him. Everywhere he went, people leaned in, laughed, nodded. His smile came easily, practiced and smooth. Margaret felt proud watching him, even now. That pride had not left her, even after the quiet distance she felt between them earlier. She told herself this night was important to him. She told herself to be patient. When the music faded and the lights shifted, Ethan returned to the stage. The room slowly settled. People turned their chairs, glasses paused halfway to mouths. The attention gathered around him without effort. "Thank you again for being here tonight," Ethan said, his voice confident and clear. "The support has been incredible." Applause followed. Margaret joined in, her claps soft but steady. Ethan waited for the sound to fade, then lifted his hand slightly. His expression changed just a bit. A playful smile spread across his face. "Now," he said, "before we wrap things up, we thought we'd add something fun. Just a little surprise to keep the night lively." A ripple of interest moved through the crowd. A few people laughed already, curious. Margaret felt her shoulders tighten, though she didn't know why. Ethan continued, pacing the stage. "Everyone here has been so generous. So we figured, why not lighten the mood?" Behind him, the large screen flickered on. Margaret looked up. Her breath caught. Her face filled the screen. It was an old photo, taken without her knowing. She was standing in her kitchen, holding a dish towel, smiling at something off camera. It was an ordinary moment. A private one. Laughter spread through the room, uneven and unsure at first. Margaret felt heat rush to her face. Her ears rang slightly. She looked around, confused, searching faces for answers she did not have. "There she is," Ethan said, laughing lightly. "My mom." The laughter grew louder. Margaret's hands tightened in her lap. "She's not exactly the life of the party," Ethan went on, his tone playful. "But she means well." More laughter. Margaret's heart began to pound. This was happening too fast. She waited for him to stop. For him to explain. For him to turn and look at her. He did not. "So," Ethan said, spreading his arms, "up for auction tonight, one evening with my boring mom." The words echoed in her chest. He kept going. Home-cooked meals. Early nights. No surprises. The crowd laughed again. Some people glanced toward Margaret, smiling as if sharing the joke with her. "And the starting bid," Ethan said, pausing just long enough for effect, $1. The room burst into laughter and applause. Margaret froze. Her mind went blank, then filled all at once. She felt every eye on her, even if most of them were not. The sound in the room seemed distant, as though she were hearing it through a wall. She was not in on the joke. Her first instinct was to stand up, to say something, to ask him to stop. But her body did not move. Her legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. She thought of Ethan, of the people around him, of how easily this could turn into something worse if she reacted. A small, careful smile formed on her face. It felt wrong. But it felt safer than the truth. Someone in the crowd raised a bidding paddle. $1, they called out, laughing. More laughter followed. Margaret nodded once, gently, as if she agreed. As if this were fine. Inside, something folded in on itself. Another voice called out, $2. Ethan laughed from the stage. Careful now, he said. She might start charging extra. The crowd enjoyed that. Applause followed. Margaret kept her smile in place. Her jaw ached. Her hands trembled, and she pressed them together to stop the shaking. She told herself to breathe. In, out. Just get through this moment. The bidding stopped quickly. It had never been serious. Ethan raised his hand again, grinning. All right, he said. We'll end it there. Don't want to scare her off. The room laughed one last time. The screen behind him went dark. Just like that, it was over. The music returned. People resumed their conversations. The moment dissolved into the larger noise of the evening. Margaret remained seated. No one spoke to her right away. A woman nearby gave her a polite smile, then turned back to her group. Someone else avoided her eyes entirely. Margaret's smile slowly faded once she was sure no one was watching. Her chest felt tight. Not sharp pain, but something deeper. Something heavy. She stared at the table in front of her, at the neat place setting she no longer cared about. Her appetite was gone. She thought of all the times she had defended Ethan. All the times she had told herself he was busy, that success made people act differently. She wondered when she had become something to laugh at. Ethan did not come over to her after the auction. He stayed surrounded by people, shaking hands, laughing, posing for photos. Each time Margaret thought he might glance her way, he turned toward someone else. She stayed where she was. Quiet. Still. A server asked if she wanted a drink. Margaret shook her head. She considered leaving. The thought brought relief, but also fear. What if leaving caused more trouble? What if someone noticed? So she stayed. The rest of the night blurred together. Margaret watched the room empty slowly. She listened without hearing. Smiled when she felt she had to. When it was finally appropriate to stand, she did so carefully. She smoothed her dress, the same motion she had done earlier, though now it felt heavier. She looked once more toward the center of the room. Ethan was still laughing, still shining. She did not interrupt him. She turned and walked toward the exit. Outside, the night air felt cool against her face. She took a deep breath, letting it steady her. Her smile disappeared. She did not cry. Not yet. She walked away slowly, carrying the weight of a joke she never agreed to, unaware of how far its echo would travel. The laughter did not last long, but the sound of it stayed with Margaret. As the mock bids echoed through the room, she sat very still, her eyes fixed on a point just beyond the table. Her smile remained on her face, small and careful, as if it was something fragile she was afraid to drop. Around her, the moment was already losing its shine. People were chuckling less now, some shifting in their seats, some glancing at each other as if unsure whether to keep laughing. Margaret noticed all of it without really looking. Her mind had gone somewhere else. She thought of mornings that began before sunrise, of alarm clocks ringing in dark rooms, of slipping quietly out of bed so she would not wake a small boy who needed his sleep. She remembered pulling on the same coat day after day, even when the lining tore, because there was no money for another. She remembered working one job, then another, cleaning offices at dawn, standing on her feet all day, coming home tired but forcing herself to smile because Ethan would be waiting, homework spread across the table, eyes bright with questions. She had learned how to stretch time the way she stretched money, how to pack love into the small hours they had together, how to listen, even when her head ached. How to encourage dreams she knew she might never see. She remembered skipping things she once wanted. Classes she thought about taking but never did. Trips she never planned. Friends she slowly lost touch with because there was always something more urgent. There was always Ethan. She never thought of it as sacrifice back then. It was just life. It was just what needed to be done. Another laugh rose in the room, thinner this time. $1, someone repeated weakly, as if unsure whether to keep playing along. Margaret's smile did not change. She thought of parent-teacher meetings where she sat alone, nodding politely while others came in pairs. Of cheering from the sidelines at school events, clapping until her hands hurt, even when Ethan barely looked her way. She remembered the night he told her he had been accepted into college in the city. How he had talked fast, full of excitement, while she stood at the sink pretending not to worry about money she did not have. She remembered hugging him, telling him she was proud, meaning it with every part of herself. She had believed that was enough. The bids slowed. The energy shifted. People were realizing this was not as funny as it first seemed. Some looked toward Margaret again, this time with something closer to discomfort. She did not meet their eyes. Her thoughts moved forward, to later years. To shorter phone calls. To conversations filled with polite updates instead of real talk. To photos posted online where Ethan looked happy and successful, standing beside people Margaret did not know. She wondered when she had stopped fitting into that picture. Someone cleared their throat in the audience. A small sound, but it felt loud to her. Ethan was still smiling on stage, but even he seemed to sense the moment slipping. The laughter was uneven now. The joke was losing its grip. Margaret realized then, with a quiet clarity that surprised her, that this was not just carelessness. This was how he saw her. Not as the woman who had stayed up all night sewing a torn backpack so he would not feel embarrassed at school. Not as the person who skipped meals so he could eat more. Not as the steady presence who had never once walked away. But as something awkward. Something that did not match the image he had built. A liability. The thought did not come with anger. It came with a deep, steady sadness. No one seriously bid. No one wanted to take the joke any further. People shifted, waiting for it to end. The moment faded, thin and uncomfortable. Ethan raised his hand, laughing it off, easing the room back into motion. Margaret barely heard him. Inside her, something settled into place. She understood now that her role in his life had changed in ways she had not wanted to see before. She had always thought of herself as the foundation, quiet and unseen but necessary. Now she realized foundations are often forgotten once the building is tall enough. Her smile finally softened, becoming something closer to calm acceptance. She breathed in slowly. She had done her part. The joke was ending. The laughter was gone. People were already moving on to the next thing. But the damage did not fade with the sound. It stayed. It settled deep, silent and heavy, as Margaret sat in her chair, surrounded by people, feeling more alone than she had in years. The laughter was already fading when Ethan lifted his hand, ready to bring the moment to a neat and easy close. He smiled the way people did when they believed they were still in control, when a situation had gone just as planned. "All right," he said lightly. "I think we've had enough fun with that." A few people laughed in relief. Chairs shifted. Someone near the front reached for their drink again. Margaret remained seated, her hands folded, her gaze lowered. She was focused on breathing, on keeping herself steady until the moment passed completely. That was when a voice spoke. It came from the back of the room. Calm. Clear. Unhurried. $1 million. The words cut through the air like a clean line. For a second, no one reacted. It was as if the room itself needed time to understand what had just been said. Then heads began to turn. Conversations stopped mid-word. The soft music seemed suddenly too loud, then stopped altogether. Margaret looked up. Ethan froze on the stage, his smile still in place but no longer quite right. He squinted toward the back of the room, clearly assuming he had misheard. "I'm sorry," he said with a small laugh. "I think there might be some confusion back there." The man who had spoken stood slowly. He was tall and well-dressed, his suit simple but clearly expensive. Not flashy. Not loud. He did not smile. He held the bidding paddle loosely in one hand, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. $1 million, the man repeated, his voice steady. The room went completely silent. Margaret felt her heart skip. She looked around, trying to read the faces near her. Mouths were slightly open. Eyes were wide. No one laughed this time. Ethan chuckled again, though the sound was thin now. "All right," he said, waving a hand. "Very funny." The man did not sit. A staff member near the stage glanced at the auction coordinator. The coordinator hesitated, then leaned into the microphone, her voice careful. "Sir," she said, "can you please confirm your bid?" The man nodded once. "Confirmed." A quiet gasp moved through the room. Margaret's hands tightened in her lap. She felt suddenly aware of her own heartbeat, strong and fast. She did not understand what was happening, only that the air around her had changed. Ethan's smile finally slipped. He looked from the man to the coordinator, then out at the audience. The easy confidence he had carried all night faltered, just for a moment. $1 million, he repeated, slower now. "Yes," the man said. 1 million. No one laughed. The auction coordinator cleared her throat. "Do we have any higher bids?" Silence answered her. The man remained standing, composed, waiting. Margaret felt as if the room had tilted slightly. She had been invisible moments ago. Now she felt the weight of attention settling around her, cautious and uncertain. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He seemed unsure what to say next. The coordinator raised her gavel, her hand steady but her eyes alert. "Going once," she said. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Going twice." Margaret's breath caught. The gavel came down with a sharp sound. "Sold." The word echoed. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room erupted, not with laughter, but with stunned whispers. People leaned toward each other, voices low and urgent. Some turned fully in their chairs to look at Margaret now, no longer smiling. Ethan stood very still. Margaret remained seated, her mind struggling to catch up. She felt as though she had stepped into someone else's story, one she did not recognize. The man lowered his paddle and sat back down. His eyes met Margaret's for the first time. There was no humor in his expression. Only something thoughtful, respectful. Margaret looked away, her chest tight, her thoughts racing. She did not know why he had done this. She did not know what it meant. She only knew that the joke was no longer a joke, and that the night had just changed in a way no one in the room had expected. The room was still buzzing when the man stood again. This time, he did not wait for silence to find him. He stepped forward calmly, his presence steady, drawing attention without effort. The whispers slowly faded. People turned fully in their seats. Even the staff paused, unsure of what was supposed to happen next. Ethan remained on the stage, stiff now, his hands clasped in front of him. His face had lost its earlier ease. He watched the man carefully, as if trying to understand a situation that no longer followed his rules. "My name is Daniel," the man said. His voice was calm, neither loud nor soft, but it carried. It was the kind of voice people trusted without knowing why. "I'm not here for entertainment," Daniel continued. "And I'm not here to make a joke." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the front lowered their gaze. Daniel turned slightly, allowing his eyes to move across the room before settling, gently, on Margaret. "I'm here," he said, "to make a statement." Margaret felt her breath catch. She sat frozen, her hands resting in her lap, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Her name had not been spoken, yet somehow she knew this was about her. Daniel took a small step forward. "Many years ago," he said, I was not the person you see standing here tonight. The room was silent now, fully. I was struggling, he went on. I had lost my job. I had nowhere stable to stay. I was tired, angry, and close to giving up. Ethan glanced toward the audience, then back at Daniel, his brow furrowing. One night, Daniel said, I met a woman outside a building where I was cleaning offices for cash. Margaret's heart began to pound. She noticed I hadn't eaten. She didn't ask questions. She didn't lecture me. She simply shared her food. A quiet murmur moved through the crowd. Daniel's gaze did not leave Margaret now. She talked to me like I mattered, he said. Like I wasn't invisible. When I told her I didn't know what I was going to do next, she didn't give me advice. She gave me time. Margaret's mind raced. A memory stirred. A late night. A tired man sitting on the steps. A paper bag with leftover food she had planned to save for the next day. She had not thought of it as kindness. She had thought of it as nothing. She told me she was raising her son alone, Daniel continued. Working more hours than she should. Carrying more than anyone should have to. Margaret's eyes filled, though no tears fell. She said something that night that stayed with me, Daniel said. She said, just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're worth less. A breath moved through the room, slow and collective. That woman, Daniel said, was Margaret. Every head turned. Margaret felt the weight of it all at once. The room. The lights. The faces now looking at her differently. She shook her head slightly, disbelief written across her face. I never forgot her, Daniel said. Not because of what she gave me, but because of how she saw me. Ethan's face had gone pale. Daniel turned toward him then, not unkindly, but directly. I didn't bid tonight because I wanted an evening of entertainment, Daniel said. I bid because I wanted to remind this room of something. He paused. Some people are foundations, he said. They don't stand on stages. They don't ask for recognition. But without them, nothing else stands. Silence pressed in. Margaret felt tears finally reach her eyes. She blinked, trying to hold them back, overwhelmed by a memory she had never known mattered. Daniel looked back at her. You changed the direction of my life, he said simply. And you never asked for anything in return. The room remained still. Ethan looked at his mother then. Really looked at her. For the first time that night, his expression was not polished. It was shaken. Confused. Something like regret flickered across his face. Margaret met his eyes, her chest tight, her heart full in a way she could not explain. She had come to the gala feeling small. She now realized she never was. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He stood where he was, steady and composed, letting the silence do its work before he spoke again. I don't believe respect is something we earn with success, he said. I think it's something we owe, especially to the people who carried us when we had nothing to give. No one interrupted him. Even the smallest movements in the room seemed to stop. Daniel turned slightly, his eyes moving across the guests. We talk a lot about impact, he continued. About influence. About what really matters. He paused, then added, but we often forget the labor that doesn't come with titles. The work that doesn't get applause. Margaret listened, her hands resting loosely now, her breathing slow. Each word felt careful, placed with intention. Parents, Daniel said, especially those who raise children alone, do invisible work every single day. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone lowered their head. They trade sleep for safety, he went on. Dreams for stability. Recognition for results they may never see. Daniel did not look at Ethan as he spoke, but the words found him anyway. When love is treated like a joke, Daniel said calmly, it teaches the room something dangerous. It teaches that sacrifice is small, that care is ordinary, that the people who give the most deserve the least consideration. The air grew heavy. Margaret felt something loosen inside her. She had spent years convincing herself that being unseen was the price of love. Hearing it named aloud made it feel different. Around the room, faces had changed. Smiles were gone now. People looked thoughtful, uncomfortable. Some glanced toward Margaret again, this time without amusement. Daniel folded his hands loosely in front of him. "I didn't speak tonight to shame anyone," he said. "I spoke because moments like this matter." He let that sit. "Every room has a mirror," Daniel continued. "Sometimes it shows us who we want to be. Sometimes it shows us who we've been." Ethan stood very still on the stage. The easy confidence that had carried him through the evening was gone. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. He stared ahead, but his eyes were unfocused, as if he were seeing something else entirely. He thought of his mother sitting alone at dinner tables, of her quiet presence at school events, of all the moments he had brushed past without really seeing. For the first time, he felt the weight of the room pressing inward, not outward. The laughter that had filled the space earlier felt distant now, almost unreal. Daniel looked toward Margaret once more, briefly. There was no pity in his expression, only acknowledgement. "She didn't change my life with money," he said. "She changed it with dignity." The words settled deeply. A woman near the front nodded slowly. A man beside her exhaled, rubbing his hands together. No one clapped. This was not a moment for applause. Ethan swallowed. He realized then that the auction had not ended when the gavel fell. It had turned. The room was no longer laughing with him. It was looking at him. And in that quiet, reflective silence, Ethan saw himself clearly. It was not an image he liked. Margaret sat quietly, her posture relaxed for the first time that night. She did not need to speak. The truth had already been said. The gala would continue. Conversations would resume. But something permanent had shifted. The joke was gone. What remained was reckoning. The gala did not end with cheers. It ended quietly. The donation was accepted. The paperwork was completed. The number was confirmed more than once, careful and exact. But there was no applause when it was done. No celebratory music. The energy that usually followed a large gift never arrived. People began to gather their things instead. Conversations were low and thoughtful. Some guests avoided eye contact with the stage. Others spoke in hushed voices, as if they were leaving a place of worship rather than a celebration. Margaret stood when it felt appropriate. Her movements were slow and steady. She no longer felt the need to rush or hide. Ethan finally stepped down from the stage. He moved through the thinning crowd with none of his earlier confidence. When he reached her, he hesitated, as if unsure how to begin. "Mom," he said quietly. Margaret turned to face him. Up close, she could see how shaken he was. His eyes were tired. His shoulders slumped slightly, like someone who had carried a heavy weight all at once. "I didn't mean for it to go like that," he said. "I thought it would just be fun." Margaret listened. She did not interrupt him. "I didn't think," he added, his voice dropping. "I'm sorry if it hurt you." She took a breath. "I was hurt," she said calmly. The words were simple, honest. They did not rise in volume or sharpness. "You didn't ask me," she continued. "You didn't see me. You turned my life into something for people to laugh at." Ethan looked down. "I never wanted to embarrass you," he said. "But you did," Margaret replied. There was no anger in her tone, just clarity. "I came because you invited me," she said. "Because you're my son. But I won't stay quiet when I'm treated like that." Ethan nodded slowly. He swallowed, searching for words that did not come. "I need you to understand something," Margaret went on. "Love doesn't mean accepting everything. It doesn't mean disappearing so someone else can shine." She paused. "I raised you to do better than this. The words landed harder than any accusation. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had shifted. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. Margaret shook her head gently. "That's something you'll have to figure out." She turned slightly, signaling that the conversation was over for now. Nearby, Daniel waited, giving them space. When Margaret approached him, he offered a small, respectful nod. "I hope I didn't overstep," he said. "You didn't," Margaret replied. Daniel smiled faintly. "There are people who should know you," he said. "Not because of sympathy. Because of who you are." He spoke of opportunities, of advisory work, of speaking with organizations that supported families and caregivers. Not offers wrapped in pity, but invitations grounded in respect. Margaret listened carefully. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'd ask," Daniel replied. They shook hands. As Margaret walked toward the exit, Ethan watched her go. He did not stop her this time. For the first time, he understood that success could not erase the past. That the cost of his arrogance was not public embarrassment, but the quiet distance now growing between him and the person who had given him everything. Margaret stepped outside into the cool night air. She felt tired, but she also felt clear. Some choices could still be made. Some consequences would take longer to face. Months passed. The night of the gala became something Margaret thought about less often, not because it no longer mattered, but because it no longer defined her. Time had a way of softening sharp edges, of turning pain into understanding. Her life looked different now. Not louder, not flashy, just steadier. Margaret woke each morning with a sense of purpose that felt new and familiar at the same time. She still lived simply. She still preferred quiet mornings and careful routines. But she was no longer invisible, not even to herself. She had accepted some of the opportunities Daniel mentioned. Not all. She chose carefully. She sat in rooms where people listened when she spoke. She shared her experiences with parents who felt unseen, caregivers who carried heavy loads without recognition. She did not speak dramatically. She spoke honestly. People thanked her afterward. Not with pity, but with respect. Margaret found confidence not in praise, but in being heard. Ethan's life had also changed, though more slowly. He did not try to fix everything with grand gestures. He learned painfully that words alone were thin. Apologies meant little without patience behind them. At first, his calls were awkward, short, careful. Margaret answered when she was ready. He asked questions he had never asked before. About her days. About her work. About how she was feeling. Sometimes the conversations were quiet. Sometimes they ended sooner than he hoped. He did not push. Ethan volunteered more. Not for recognition, but because it felt necessary. He stepped back from being the center of every room. He listened more than he spoke. People noticed the change, though few understood its cause. Trust did not return quickly, but it began to return. One afternoon, months later, they met for coffee. No audience. No stage. Just a small table by a window. "I see you differently now," Ethan said. Margaret looked at him, studying his face. He looked older, quieter. "I see myself differently too," she replied. They sat in silence for a moment, comfortable enough to let it exist. Margaret no longer felt the need to prove her worth. She had learned that true value did not come from being praised publicly or defended loudly. It came from knowing who you were, even when no one was watching. Ethan understood something else now. Respect, once lost in front of others, could not be reclaimed with a speech. It had to be earned privately, slowly, through changed behavior and steady humility. The gala was remembered by many as an uncomfortable evening. Margaret remembered it as a turning point. Some things she had learned were never meant to be auctioned. Dignity, love, true worth. Those things could only be given, and recognized, freely.